Okay, Rebecca, here we are. I'm Andrew Gibbons, you're Rebecca Norton. You can remind us of that in a bit. We're going to punch straight into this. Today's topic is around why do we give up on things? Now, those things can be big things, small things. It could be a permanent give up. It could be a postponement. The issue is, and I think it's interesting, I've given this some thought. I might not show that when I start this conversation properly, but it's all about why do we give up on things? Do you want to kick us off?
Oh, I think it's a really good timely point actually as well. So obviously a lot of people will have made New Year's resolutions and we're already sort of a couple of weeks into New Year and people have probably given up already. So I think it's one of those things, isn't it? There's some statistics around it. I'm sure it's something like only 8% of people stick with New Year's resolutions or whatever. So, and I think part of the problem is, well, I think there's lots of reasons why people give up. So I think one of them for New Year's resolutions and things is that people don't set themselves up for success in the right way. I will give you that one as a starter for now.
Right, I've got a long list because I've been thinking about this, and it shocked me that I came up with so many things on the list. And something I was going to say from the start is giving up on something is not always a bad thing. There are good reasons to give up on things. Yeah. I think very often we can get into a mindset of, if I give up on something, I should have persisted. I should have somehow, you get into self-loathing. Oh no, why did I give up on that? Well, sometimes it's the right thing to do, and for reasons we might go into. So I just want to put out there that we don't have to always be cutting ourselves into pieces for giving up on something.
No, I think that's really good. I think sometimes that giving up is linked to failure, and that's not the same thing. So I think that's really good to clarify, is giving up is not necessarily a sign of failure.
I guess if we were detectorists, we'd have a view on this, because we would be able to view every time I go out with sweeping a field looking for gold, the next time I go out could be the one time it happens. How many times, I'm not a detectorist, but I've watched the programs. There's a great series on the telly. And I guess that mindset for them, I'm just thinking in that channel, is you don't give up because the next time you go out could be the time that it pays off. Something's out there waiting to be found. Where am I going with this? I guess it's about judgment. At what point do you choose to give up?
Yeah, and I think that's the key, isn't it? And for me, I suppose one of those judgments be around, is this still what I want? Yeah. And is it working? So we can keep doing something, but actually it might be that it's not actually working. So giving up is the best option.
Well, no, that's taking me somewhere I hadn't thought about, because you could be pursuing a path, doing something, whatever that is, and with whatever degree of complexity and whatever, it could be anything. So you could be doing something, but you should have given up on it long ago.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah. And that's harsh to think. And I think sometimes people continue doing something because by stopping, they're worried that other people will think they've failed, or, it's a big thing sometimes, isn't it? And am I allowed to bring in political things here?
Oh, go on, do it.
Well, I just wonder with the HS2 thing, whether that's going anywhere, is it time they gave up on that idea? And how much money and time do you keep investing in something if it's not working? And actually, sometimes it's much better to stop and give up than it is to keep going, keep going, keep going.
Well, all right, we're not going to get deliberately, overtly political, but political and big public spend issues are headline issues. I seem to remember before the Eurotunnel was built, there were quite a few attempts at it that didn't go anywhere. Well, they went somewhere, but not all the way across. So they had something else, isn't it? Giving up on something doesn't have to be a permanent thing. It could be a postponement, a conscious postponement. So we're not going to do this now. It's not the right time. And I think that's true of individuals. If we develop the judgment to say, if I stick with this now, it's going to soak up so much energy, time, emotional stuff, and now is not the right time. That judgment to say, and that's not easy. I'm not sure it's even possible, to be perfectly honest. Can we foresee an end that wouldn't work out and make the wonderful judgment call to saying, hey, look what I did. I was so clever, because back in March, I'd say, I'm going to give up on this and pick it up again in October. And it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, and it's a difficult decision, isn't it? It feels almost like you're backtracking. But again, just the other day, I had an email from a lady. She runs a women's group, and each year she runs awards. she's made the really difficult decision that she's not going to run the wards this year
Right.
because of her own health. She's been
Mhm.
through a lot recently and a lot going on in her personal life, and she's had to make a really difficult decision to pull those awards and stop it. She will launch them again next year. And like you say, it's not necessarily giving up on something permanently, but knowing when to stop and take a break on something is really key. And now I imagine that's been a really difficult decision for her to make, because it will have disappointed a lot of people who've put time and energy into submitting awards or writing the applications, me included. I'd started I'd put quite a bit of, but I really respected her decision for doing that and being honest about it. And I fully understand where she's coming from and fully support her in that decision.
Yeah, this is big, isn't it? Because it is about judgment, and there are so many other variables. I've got a list here, and on my list it says things like changing priorities, circumstances, being overambitious, optimistic and unrealistic, and unanticipated circumstances and events, finding your own limits of competence and desire, poor scheduling in organization. There's a long list of things, but I think ultimately it comes down to things you're talking about. How do you feel about giving up? Does it feel like a loss, or are you able to make the good judgment to say, hey, on the balance of everything, this is the right thing to do? And I think this is something we grapple with constantly.
There's a lot of emotion attached to it, I think, isn't there? And that's where it can cloud your judgment, actually. So I think being able to take a step back and look at something from an objective viewpoint can be really helpful, because like you say, circumstances change and things change. So actually continuing with what you're doing is not necessarily the best option, as difficult as that can be. Sometimes I think we sometimes get invested in things and think, if I give up, then it's a sign of failure, or if I give up, then that's all wasted time or energy or money or whatever it is. But then you're right, is if I continue down this route and spend another year doing that, then surely that's a whole year that I've wasted rather than just 6 months on it.
Judgment coordinate. And you mentioned objectivity. I don't think we can be objective. So another thing on my list is advice. Sometimes we only take our own advice when it comes to persisting, or giving up sounds a bit harsh. Whatever the opposite of persisting is, which is probably giving up. So one way in which perhaps more objectivity than our own opinion of ourselves is to take advice and to say, to move outside of your own advice to yourself and say, well, Rebecca, you know me well enough. Do you think this is something I should stick with, or do you think I should put it aside for a bit? So I think the ability to appropriately seek and take advice, because not all advice is good advice. Sometimes we could get bad advice and that says, no, stick with it. Okay, fine, that's a great idea. You say 6 months later, because I've got nothing else done, I'm giving up on this. So finding it in yourself to seek advice from the right people, not just the ones that say what you want to hear, and taking advice appropriately. I think that's in the mix too.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think sometimes maybe we need to do that because it opens up other options that perhaps we haven't considered as well. So maybe we hadn't even thought about giving up because of some of those reasons you mentioned and everything. So having somebody from an objective point of view, giving that as an option might actually be really good, and maybe bring a sense of relief. I think.
Oh yeah.
That's one thing, isn't it? Sometimes actually when you give up and stop doing something, there's an immense sense of relief, like, wow.
I certainly felt that a couple of times during last year, where something that was soaking up a huge amount of my time, as well as emotional and energy and everything else. Once I said, no, I'm not going to do this, at least not now. It did. It gave me back so much. It gave me energy. It gave me motivation. It was such a release of things, and that made me think. I think one of the issues here, and you mentioned it does feel like failure. I think all the buzz is around persistence. Oh, you've got to be persistent. You've got to be resilient, and that sort of stuff. And that's not helping sometimes, because sometimes if we take on board this message of needing to be persistent, needing to show resilience, coming back again and again, that isn't helpful and that's harmful. So I think we do need a balance of legitimizing. I don't want to use the word giving up so much now because it feels too harsh. Legitimizing not persisting.
Yeah, yeah, and I think what you just said about that release thing there as well is that's maybe something that we need to take into the mix. So if I keep persisting and keep going, what's that going to cost me? If I give up, what's that going to cost me, and what are the benefits of that? So doing that cost benefit thing for both of them, because I think, like you said, there's somehow a negative feeling attached to giving up, and we can both agree there that that's not always the case.
Yeah, and that's easy for us to sit in our respective rooms and talk in this way. Sometimes the true business and corporate world needs to be taken into account, and people are saying to themselves, I'd love to let this go, but my boss says you stick with it, and I know it's not going to work. I know it's going to do me harm. So I think in the real world, let's accept that our real world's different to a lot of people's real world. In the real world of a lot of people, in a business world, in an organizational world, there are factors which compel, certainly which influence people to persist with things that are harmful to them, and if left their own decision, they would not stick with.
And that's a really good point, isn't it? And is that the danger with big corporations and things, that is the room to maneuver? You know, we should never continue with something blindly. And for the wrong, I think you can get invested in something for the wrong reasons. Though actually there needs to be some mechanisms in place for checking, is this still the right action to take?
Well, there's a lot of buzz around mental health, and there should be, about well-being and all that stuff, which I'm not dismissing it, I'm buying absolutely into it. I see a lot of organizations where I don't see that in terms of the relations between, for instance, line management and people. People don't know each other well enough, they don't see the signals, they don't understand the pressure that people are under. So I guess I'm saying too many organizations, in my opinion, it's a 40-year perspective, have too disconnected or not close enough relationships with people to understand when someone's having an argument with themselves saying, but this isn't going to work. Why are we still doing this? And don't feel it's a legitimate conversation to have, for instance. So I think in a business world, there are pressures to persist with something which harms people, which only line management, when they do things well, can resolve.
Yeah, those good old line managers. Don't envy them.
I've not had one for 32 years, so I'm taking an, I would say, objective, but sometimes objectionable perspective on this.
Yeah, I think you mentioned something there that's key, is that line of communication, isn't it?
Caring.
Yeah.
Do I care enough? Do I understand this person well enough? Do we? Right, okay, I think we're going to go too close to having a bash here at other people. But I mean, the messages for me are, it's not always a bad thing. It needs to be a conscious thing that you recognize the pros and cons. You said cost benefit. Yeah, great. And something to just be aware of, rather than just allow yourself to be drifted along without controlling a process.
Yeah, I completely agree. Giving up is not necessarily a bad thing.
Those are our lessons for the day, people. Thank you, as ever.